Hello, everyone. I want to thank Angela Williams Stillwell for joining me today. Angela, thank you again. I really appreciate you being here. This is a safe place to share. And if ever you don't feel comfortable answering a question, please just say so. Okay? Okay.
Absolutely.
Great. Great. So let's begin with you telling your past story.
Yeah. So that's one of those questions of where do I begin? Because it has been a very varied background. I grew up in an incredibly dysfunctional family, and when I was going through my divorce in 2013, I had not really thought about how much my childhood had impacted my life until going through the divorce. And it was after the divorce that I started thinking, okay, what do I get to do going forward so that I don't repeat the past? Because in my head, I had already been doing things to not repeat the past. As a kid, I was focused on not repeating the patterns of my family. And, my parents were divorced when I was 10. There were a lot of things that were going on during that first 10 years that were incredibly. We moved in the middle of the night many, many times. I went to 13 different schools between kindergarten and my senior year of high school. We moved over like 60 times. And many of those were in the middle of the night because we were always one step ahead of, whomever my parents owed money to, right? Well, then when my parents were divorced, my dad remarried right away, and my mom married a guy shortly thereafter. And it turns out that he was abusive, mentally and emotionally. And
your mom's partner, right?
yes. And I mean, there had already been, some emotional abuse and stuff going on with what my dad was doing. And he's still alive, so I won't dig into that. Right. But my freshman year of college, 5 days before Christmas, I got the worst phone call that I could ever imagine. And that was the morning that my stepfather murdered my mom.
Oh.
And, he had called her the night before and told her that if he couldn't have her, no one would. And I had been trying to help her leave him. And the last time that I had seen her was the Sunday after Thanksgiving. I was headed back to school, and I was just, I was angry with her that day. I was like, you have to get away from him. You have to get away from him. And she was leaving, and she was trying. And, I had gone through a lot growing up, living with them. And then she actually sent my brother and I to live with my dad. And to know that a mom sends her children to go live with a man that had caused issues prior, clearly there was something major going on, right? And so I was right after that Christmas holiday, I was right back at school in January. She died in December. And then in January, I was right back in school, my freshman year of college. And, so I compartmentalized and did great, or thought I was doing great. I had been, great at compartmentalizing as a kid to be able to get through everything that I'd already been able to get through. And I was focused on, I was going to graduate from college. I wasn't going to repeat, the same patterns. I was going to be successful. I was going to be blah, 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 blah. Right. And going through my divorce, I started realizing how much the compartmentalization and some of the other habits that I had built in order to survive, right, were not healthy in a marriage. And so after my divorce, it was like, okay, what do I get to change? What do I need to change? What do I get to change? What do I get to do differently so that I don't then repeat that? Right. And that's when tons of deep work started. I I've been to Tony Robbins events. I've studied neuroscience. I'm a neuro coach myself. I started really, studying what people call soft skills. I refer to them as power skills because those are the skills that really make a difference. And it was only then that I realized how much I had brought into my marriage.
Mhm.
And once I started, in fact, I even labeled myself standing on stage one time, a master wall builder.
Mhm.
And it was when I realized how good I had gotten at being able to build walls, how negatively that wall building was impacting me. Right. Because I was friends with people but there was a lack of deep connection.
Which is understandable. I mean,
Yeah,
trust was violated, right? And so you're
absolutely.
protecting yourself. So absolutely, I get it. Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, and here I am now. I stand on stages and speak about it. And, I've spoke on podcasts and all kinds of things. I've stood in front of thousands of people and told the story. And, once I started realizing all of that and started tearing down those walls and started allowing myself to be more vulnerable. And, people use the word authentic and vulnerable interchangeably. They're not. You can be authentic and not be vulnerable.
Yes.
And there's also a process of learning the right audience to be vulnerable in front of. It's not about being vulnerable with just anyone. And Brene Brown does a great job of talking about, vulnerability is great. And there's a time and place for, who gets to share that with you.
Mhm.
And so, as I did that work, it was amazing the opportunities that presented themselves, the people that showed up in my life that had never showed up before.
Mhm.
And my life became a lot richer. I'd always had a great life. I'd always done, despite everything, joy was always a part of my life. And man, it's so much greater now.
Right. Can only imagine. Like you said, it's what you did was incredible. And clearly, once you get there, it's a wonderful feeling. But there's a lot of people out there, that are still trying to live through these unresolved issues. And
Yep.
it's really hard for them to know first where to begin, where to begin. And they're living daily life. I mean, they're like you and I, right? They're doing what they got to do. They're putting food on the table. They're interacting with their families, whether there's dysfunctional or not, or some or yes or no, but it's hard for people to really harness the fact that, like you said, they have to be vulnerable. They need to, be authentic in the right environment and do the work, right?
Mhm.
That's going to get them to that healing place.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I commend you. I mean, really, truly, I mean, you know, no one can really, unless they walked in your shoes, do they really know what you went through? But like I said, hearing your story, there's going to be people that relate, right, to some part or piece of your story, right? There's people out there that are, in that place where they build a wall that they don't trust, and it's very easy to do that because, you know, we're trying to protect ourselves, right? At one point or another, something happened to us in our past that we didn't address, right? So it's very, and it's understandable based on your situation why that would happen to you and why others would do it, right? But to recognize, and I really emphasize recognize,
Mhm.
that you needed to do the work, you needed to get to a place is tremendous, because unfortunately a lot of us we don't do that, and unless we do that, we cannot begin to heal.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and society does not nurture a
Right, or
trusting
encourage.
environment,
Correct.
right? I mean, trust is at its lowest level ever across the board
Yes. Truly.
around the world. It's at its lowest level ever. And the media feeds it, movies feed it, social media feeds it, that level of distrust.
Right.
And so when you decide to step outside of that, you are stepping outside of the norm. And there are times when you're going to be alone.
Correct. Correct.
And that can be a very scary place. That can be a very lonely place, right?
Right. Exactly. And like I said, it's all based in fear, a lot of it,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Our personal fears, what we've built up that wall because of fear, because what happened to us, and we don't want to repeat that, or we're trying to protect ourselves. And so, yeah, you're right. And the environment isn't encouraging or supportive. So that's exactly why, like I said, I started the Reach support platform, is exactly what you just said, because, and it's a platform that accepts everyone as an individual. All differences welcome, all diversity, all different people, right? Man, woman, it does not matter. And it's a place where you can go to and feel safe.
Mhm.
When you're ready to make that change, someone in that group is going to have some understanding of what you're going through and help you, in a non-monetary way, helping you just to, guide you on what you can do, giving advice that's free. And so, yeah, so that's exactly. So, and this question is there anything that you would change of your past story if you could, obviously for the better? Just elaborate, what you kind of did, but I mean, you went through the steps to do what you needed to do. Any
Yeah.
advice you would give, like you said, to someone else? Like, what would be their first steps to starting for making a better change, a change
Yeah.
for the.
One of the things that often doesn't get talked about when people are coaching or they're reading the self-help books or attending events, one of the things that is often not touched on is giving ourselves forgiveness. Because once we start making these shifts, then there's like this guilt that comes over. It's like, why didn't I do this before?
Or
Why
why
didn't
did
I do
or
X?
why did I do this when I should have done that, right? Save my.
Right, right. And we can only do what we can only do in that moment in time with what we have, right? We can only do with what we have in that moment in time. And so that idea of guilt and shame is something that, if you allow it, will haunt you. And so when you start feeling that, because it'll happen, it's going to happen. Guilt and
Sure.
shame is going to come up because that's one of the strongest it's one of the strongest emotions, or two of the strongest emotions, because guilt and shame are a little different, right? But those are two of the strongest emotions that drive people. And it's part of that fear thing that you were talking about, right? 98% of the population is driven by fear.
Yes.
And it often comes in the form of guilt and shame on some level. And, back in a tribal society, guilt and shame were used to keep people in line. And now today it's still used to
Yeah.
keep people in line. And we often do it to ourselves. And so giving ourselves grace and giving ourselves forgiveness, that is something that I urgently encourage people to really take the time to recognize when you are feeling either one of those things. And maybe you don't even realize which one they are. But if you're feeling bad about something that you did or did not do in your past, that's a form of guilt or shame.
Of course. Yeah.
And you get to recognize, okay, you can't change it, because the only place that the past exists is in your mind. It doesn't exist. It doesn't physically exist anywhere in any form or fashion. It only exists in your mind. The same way that the only place the future exists is in your mind. All that exists is right here and right now. So we get to give ourselves that grace and that forgiveness, so that as we're planning and building for our future, we can be that next person that we're wanting to be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So true. Like you said, that fear, it's paralyzing. It
Mhm.
prevents us from moving forward. Right.
Yeah.
And the only way is you have to let it go. You have to, like you said, give yourself grace,
Mhm.
forgiveness. That's the key. So yes. So thank you for that. Absolutely. So if you could rewrite your story, would you?
That's a tough question. I mean, because obviously I've been through some things that, I wouldn't wish on anyone.
Mm.
And I am where I am today as a result of, a very dysfunctional childhood that included, all sorts of emotional and physical abuse and molestation and murder and all of these things. I mean, like, who wouldn't want to rewrite that, right?
Right.
And I've done so much work at coming to grips with all of that, right? Not just coming to grips, but accepting it as part of who I am, not defining who I will be, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's the difference. So it's going to sound crazy. I wouldn't change it because it created who I am.
Exactly. That's what I figured. I would think that's going to be the answer for most people that have been over the hump, because like you said, it made you who you are today. And that's wonderful. And like I said, and now given your experience and sharing it like you are now, which I'm so grateful for, thank you, you'll be able to help others. And I
Yeah.
think that is the key, or at least that's what I believe is it's the most giving thing someone can do, right?
Mhm.
Your trauma now can help someone else. So it's wonderful. So thank you. Um, so like I said, based on like right now, someone is really having trouble,
Mhm.
don't know, they can't face their current situation. What's the first step they can take? Like you've been there, right? So what do they have to do?
Yeah. When you're in a place that you feel like you can't take another step,
Mhm. Yes.
you you get to acknowledge that you feel like you can't take another step.
Right.
That acknowledgement is the first thing, right?
Yeah.
And then you surrender to that. It's not about giving up, it's about surrendering to that.
Mhm.
I'm a God girl. I don't know if,
Mhm.
the people watching are. Um, and that place of surrender, that is a huge difference maker. Now, listen, I'm not going to say that in that moment it all gets better because it's a process, right? And it's when you open up your hands and you go, you know what, I'm going to quit. I'm going to quit clinging so tightly. I use this story, there was a scientific study that was done, and I use this one, particularly when I'm in corporations and I'm doing training. They did this study with these monkeys, and there were boxes and a hole just big enough for their hand to fit through. And inside the box was the monkey's favorite treat. And when the monkey would reach their hand in to get their treat, when they would hold on to it, they couldn't get their hand back out of the box because their hand's in a fist now.
Mhm.
But they would not drop that treat.
Okay.
All they had to do, though, to get their treat was let go, pull their hand out, and turn around to the scientist that was right there, and the scientist would hand them the treat.
So how did they know how to do that though? Like,
Well, the monkeys didn't, right? They had to
right,
train them to do it. And that's basically what we have to do for ourselves. We get to
right.
train ourselves to let go of whatever it is that we're clinging to. And it's so much easier to cling to victim status, to cling to woe is me, to cling to nothing's ever going to go right. Because again, that's what the vast majority of the world is doing and saying and living and being. And when you step out of that, you're stepping out of pretty much everyone who's around you.
Right, because that's one of my questions too. I mean, you have these key players or actors in your life, right, that have contributed, right, to the
Yep.
trauma. So what do you do? Do you distance yourself from them? Do you try to engage with them? Do you do your work on your own and then you try to come back? I mean, what would you recommend?
Yeah. And that's going to look a little different for each person, right? There's not one broad stroke that covers all of it. It's going to depend on, you know, are the other people also doing work on themselves? Because sometimes they are. And if that's the case, then you may be able to move down that path with them. Usually, however, that's not the case. And when you start doing the work on yourself, then what that does is it shines the light on what they're not doing. It makes them even more uncomfortable. So you may not be able to have that relationship anymore, at least not at that level. I'm not saying that you go and you slam the door on every single person that you've had a relationship with, or that you have a relationship with, friends, family, whatever. You just get to know that your path is very different than their path. And the moment that you start getting uptight when you're around them, it's time to check out and go do something else. It's time to hang up the phone. It's time to leave the family lunch. It's time to leave the family dinner. It's time to back away from the table. And you do it with grace, right? You give them grace because they're traveling their own path.
Right.
They're traveling their own path, and you can't shift their path for them. They get to decide when and if they want to make the shift.
Right.
So you've made that choice for yourself.
Right.
So now it's upon you to say, okay, I get to honor myself and my new direction and my new decision by creating boundaries. And when I say boundaries, I'm not talking about boundaries for anyone else. They are your boundaries that you get to uphold. Because when you uphold your own boundaries, what you're doing is you're building your own trust muscle in yourself.
Right.
Because if you've been through stuff, then so often that trust muscle goes to waste. You know, we start doing things for other people because of other people, you know, because so-and-so said so, because if I don't, they're going to XYZ, right? And the moment that you step into doing, yeah, they're still going to do that. And you get a choice to make. You have a choice then at that place to make. Are you going to travel your new path, or are you going to still let them dictate because you're feeling guilty?
Right. Or because it's familiar, right? I mean, you're used to a pattern of behavior. I think we all can relate to this, right? We're used to certain behaviors and they may not be good, but because they're familiar to us, right? We still continue, or we choose that, right?
Yeah.
We choose to surround ourselves with that. And then until we recognize that it's really bringing us down, that's when we set the clear boundaries, right? Which helps us to get past that and move forward. It's just tough because, like you said, you still, you know, you may want it to have a connection, or maybe, like you said, that connection will be there. But when that other person has done the work and is willing to meet you, you know, halfway, right? Or at least part of the way, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I had a conversation with someone, not long ago. I mean, you know, I've been divorced now since 2013. So I've been divorced 11 years. And, you know, I started dating, and my dating process has looked interesting as I've continued to do the work on myself and what I find acceptable and what I don't find acceptable. And, you know, as I've developed my own boundaries for myself. And I had a conversation with someone and I was like, we're just not in alignment right now. I want you to go and do the work that you need to do, but that's your choice. And I love you, but I love me more.
Exactly. And only then can you really choose the right partner, right? Until you know exactly what you'll accept and what you will not. Like you said, set those clear boundaries. Yes.
Yeah, and it's not about them upholding the boundaries. It's about you upholding the boundaries.
Right.
Other people who haven't done this work, they don't understand that process. They're like, what do you mean? It's your boundary. I can't cross your boundary. No, I can't cross my boundary.
Right.
You may cross my boundary. That doesn't mean I get to accept it.
Right. So how do you deal with, I mean, no one's perfect, right? So I mean, do you have like you know, I'll forgive this type of, you know, do you have like certain, yeah, I don't even want to say it, but you know what I mean? Like certain parameters that you kind of lessen the, you know what I mean? Like you just kind of forgive it or let it go, or you say, oh, it's okay, or it might
Yeah,
be a question. I don't know, but I'm just curious.
yeah. Again, I mean, that's gonna vary based on the situation, right? I mean, if you're in a relationship with someone, there are going to be times where, you know, I don't like the word compromise. I think that I don't think it's about necessarily compromising. I think it's about coming to an agreement. And you know, it's, and maybe that's splitting hairs, maybe that's semantics. I don't know. I think that I think that we get to come to agreements of what's acceptable and what isn't. We get to, so one of the things, and I'll just keep using this analogy of dating, right?
Mhm.
So often when we're setting goals, when you hear people talking about dating, for instance, they put this checklist together of what the other person, what they want in this other person.
Right. Mhm.
And I say, and I say this about the career you put together, the purpose in your life you put together, the relationship that you have, whatever it is, it's not about a checklist of things to do or how to be. It's what do you want to be experiencing?
Mhm.
What are the experiences that you want to have? And and that's a completely different way of thinking, right? Thinking about a dream job or a dream career, or, you putting together a dream business. And we think, okay, I want to make $250,000 a year, and I want to do this, and I want to speak to these people, and I want to do, okay, let's take all that off the table.
Mhm.
What do you want to be experiencing in life
Mhm.
in relation to whatever it is that you're setting the goals for? Right?
Yeah, and I mean, I have to say on a personal level, I can relate to this because, in a relationship, people change, right? I mean, that's the whole thing. I don't know. It's tough to navigate, right? When one's moving in one direction, the other person might not be in the same direction. So, like,
Right.
how do you come to that agreement, right?
Right.
And without, necessarily like, 95% of it's great, but the 5% is okay, this is not really where, so that's the thing for me. It's like, where do you come to an agreement when you may not be able to, you know what I mean? That's the question, and still try to keep your marriage together.
Yeah,
Something, that I take pride in, which I know at some point you felt that way too, but it's like, don't get me wrong, I love my husband, but we're different, right? We're different.
absolutely. There are no two people on the face of the earth that are
Right.
alike.
Right. So I guess it's hard. Like I said, it's like I might have an envisioned dream of what my retirement might be or what it looks like or when we retire, right? And he has a different viewpoint. So it's like, how do you come together?
Yeah, yeah. You get to have conversations, very open conversations,
Right.
like where the emotion gets set aside,
Mhm.
and you openly talk. I mean, like in the dating arena, I have conversations with people very early on about this is what I want to be experiencing. And it's okay if you don't. I'm okay with that. I want someone who's pretty much in alignment with values. They don't have to be exact. I want someone who's in alignment with experiences that they want to have. They don't have to be exact because we're two individuals,
Right.
right? And then you get to decide, okay, if they're not in alignment with something that's super important to me, can we continue down the path together with me having that experience and them doing the thing that they want to do and us come back together,
It's an option
right?
for sure. Yeah.
So, and that gets into what I was talking about, the power skills and the soft skills and all of that, because having those conversations are not easy. Those are difficult conversations to have.
Right.
And people let their emotions, bubble up, and they let their emotions rule. And from a neuroscience standpoint, they've discovered that the emotion comes after a thought, because of the way that the brain lights up whenever you're in the middle of reacting, right, or responding. And so you have certain emotions come up because of meaning and beliefs that you have, meaning that you're given to whatever that you're giving to whatever the situation is, and beliefs that you have about that situation based on things that have happened in the past. So when you do this work and then you get to a place where you can say, oh, look, I'm getting triggered. What am I really being triggered about? Is it really that they're doing something, or is it the meaning that I'm giving it?
Mhm. Yeah.
Right?
Because ultimately you're in control of how you react, right? To your
Yes.
right.
Yes.
Get it totally.
And then you get to step back and say, okay, what around this can I shift, versus is there another in-depth, maybe even difficult conversation that gets to take place.
Right. When the timing's right.
Yes, yes. You
When
don't do it when you're
an
all
emotion.
heated and all of that stuff. You get to give yourself time out, right? I mean,
Right.
and that's another skill, right? It's
Right.
learning to be able to say, you know what, I need to tap out right now for a few minutes, or maybe even for a day or two, and give me some space to think about this
Mhm.
and then come back to it.
Right. No, it's true. It's the best way to do it. Yeah.
Yeah. And even in a work environment, it's the same thing, right? I mean, people get all heated in work environments, and they, particularly if it's a boss,
Mhm.
they don't feel comfortable saying, hey, I need to take some time out. I'm getting worked up about this.
Mhm.
Well, okay. So now you're operating from your amygdala, your reptilian brain, your brain that is, fight or flight or freeze.
Right.
You don't want to be operating from that place, because that place is going to be your old way.
Right.
That place is focused on surviving. That's not focused on thriving or making the best decision. It's, what is the quickest way I can get out of this and go about my business? And that is not always the best way.
Right. So the idea would be just to take that time, or like you said, in a boss situation, just say, take in what you need to take in and then step away, revisit
Yep.
it at another time. Right.
Yeah, you get to own saying, I appreciate where we are right now, and what I'm asking for is 15 minutes or an hour, or let me think about it over the weekend, or whatever that looks like, right?
Mhm.
And then I can come back and have a more rational conversation.
That's really good. That's really great advice. Yeah.
And if that person, whether it's a boss or your spouse or your child or whatever, is not giving you that space to do that, that's a boundary you get to set for yourself,
Right.
right?
Yes. Very good stuff. Yep.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. So I wonder, like, if someone's listening to this, and like you said, there's a lot of childhood trauma, and based on your story, right? And you knew, you saw it, you lived it, do you ever say to yourself, gosh, I wish I had done this, I wish I had done that? Or did you recognize, it's just not, it was not my place to, and just let it go? Like, I'm just curious what your thoughts are on
Yeah,
that.
I mean, that's a great question, and that gets back to the guilt and shame thing, right? I mean,
Right.
there were lots of times that I didn't even realize that I was having those thoughts. For instance, just a few years ago, I was working with a coach, and there was something that I thought that I had done all the work around my mom's death and all of that. And what I realized was that there was still an anger that I was carrying. And I know that sounds like, when it came up, I was like, that is the most ridiculous thing ever. How could I ever be angry with my mom,
No,
given everything
I
that
can
she
actually
did?
understand that. I can understand that.
Well,
Yeah.
but given everything that she went through, I
Right.
felt guilty. I was like, who am I to be angry at my mom with everything that she went through?
Because now you're coming from a place of understanding, which oftentimes we
Yes.
can't quite get there. Right.
Yes.
Right.
And I was angry. I was like, why did she choose him over me and my brother when she sent us to live with our dad? Why was she so slow at trying to get away? Why did she marry him in the first place? Because the first time that I met him, I told her when I was 11 years old that there was something wrong with that man.
Mhm.
So there was a lot of that, going on in my head. And I thought that I had done all the work on it and I was all fine.
Mhm.
And then I realized, no, there was some anger there.
Mhm.
And, truth is, there may still be some anger there.
Understandable.
Right.
Yeah, we're human.
And yeah, exactly. Exactly. And it's okay.
Yes.
I can't change it. It
Mhm.
is what it is. And that, not that it really drives me crazy when people use that phrase. I can't believe that phrase just actually came out of my mouth. It is what it is. However, it is what it is. It's in the past, and the only place that it exists is in my mind. And so with that, I get to release it. I get to surrender it. And, I actually have a couple of things around surrender and joy stories that happened. that really illuminated that for me. And is it okay to share one of those?
Oh, sure, absolutely. Because one of my questions would be, how did you surrender? Like, how do you, like if you could say something to your mom today, or have you written one of those letters or ripped it up? Because yeah, tell me what you did to get past that point.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I have written those letters. I'll get to that in a second. So the first story, about joy, like I said, I had always, as a kid, even in the thick of moving in the middle of the night and changing schools all the time, I was always a pretty joyful child. I was always pretty joyful. Nobody around me at any of the schools I went to or any of the people I hung out with had any clue that that stuff was going on at my home. Nobody knew. And so joy was just something, laughter, all of that sort of stuff was just something that that was always part of me. Well, I think it was my divorce, we were separated for a couple of years before the divorce was final. And in that time frame, there was a parole board hearing for my stepfather. And I drove across the state to go to this parole board hearing, and I was by myself, but I was meeting the rest of my family who was coming in from other places. And we were having to do this every few years, go and have these parole board meetings and relive the whole entire thing over and over and over again. Yeah. And at this point, it had been a very emotional day. I mean, remember, I was in the middle of my divorce. I'd been married for almost 22. By the time my divorce was final, I was married for 22 years. So it wasn't like a short marriage. Right. And so, I was in the middle of all of that, going to this parole board hearing, all the emotions of bringing up all of the story, having to go through all of the letters that were written and all that kind of stuff. And as I am walking back to my car by myself at the end of the day, to drive 2.5 hours back home, I hear this voice say, "Choose joy." Mm-hmm. And I sat down in my car and I was mad. I was angry. I was like, what do you mean choose joy? Are you freaking kidding me right now? Like today of all days? And I was like, the only place that could have come from was God, right? I mean, that was not something that would have come from anybody else to say, choose joy in that moment. And I was like, no, mm-hmm. I've always been joyful. I do not have to choose joy right now. And then I sat there, and it was right after, I guess around this time frame is, iPhones were out or whatever. And I pulled it up and I found a meme that said, "Today I choose joy." And I posted it. And I remember exactly what this picture looks like. The background was turquoise. It was red poppies that were just like these blobs of red with a black stem. And the lettering just said, "Today I choose joy." And I was like, okay, I get to choose joy through all of this.
It gives me goosebumps because really, truly, it always comes down to a choice, doesn't it? We always choose, and it's amazing. I mean, like I said, your story is incredible, and you're such an amazing person to have endured all that and be where you are today. I mean, it's tremendous, truly. So yeah, you're right. It's I'm glad you chose joy. Like I said, I'm glad you did that because it's self-preservation.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, it's self-preservation. And I would say it's self-preservation because that's part of the fight or flight or freeze is self-preservation. I would say it's even more than that. I'd say it's about thriving. Mm-hmm. It's about going to that next level because our subconscious brain is all about survivability. I think I said this on the live that I did yesterday. Or I don't know, one day I do lives so frequently. I was talking about, that your subconscious brain is about survivability. It's not about thrivability. And I was like, I don't even know if that's really a word, but it's a word now, thrivability. And to choose joy is about thriving. To make a conscious decision to choose joy is about thriving. It's not about surviving. It's about saying, okay, even when it's uncomfortable, I get to choose joy.
We all have that choice that we can make.
Yeah.
Just choose it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that's tremendous. No, really great stuff. And like I said, I mean, I'm sure, like I said, you had those letters, right, that you wrote, right, to your mom.
I've written letters to all sorts of people.
Yeah, I was gonna say quite a few, right, to you.
Yeah.
And it helps you, right? I mean, it's nothing you necessarily conveyed to that person, I'm assuming. You just, well, with your mom, you couldn't, but I'm saying, with other actors, your dad. I mean, did you
Yeah.
ever have an in-person conversation or something, or was it just,
So with my dad, he actually has Alzheimer's now. And my dad, not my stepdad, my
right,
dad.
right.
He has Alzheimer's. And so I talk about the Alzheimer's healed my relationship with my dad, because I no longer question, is he telling the truth or not?
So you have conversation with your dad?
Well, yes, I've had conversations.
Yeah, how does that go? I'm, again, curious.
I really don't, I mean, with him now, I just laugh and have a good time with him. And I sing with him because singing helps people with Alzheimer's. It calms them down. And so I just, when I've spent time with him, it's as if none of that other stuff even happened. Right.
Has he ever brought it up? I'm curious. I don't know. Has he ever brought up anything or had an episode, so to speak?
Prior to the Alzheimer's, sometimes he would talk about feeling guilty. And because of some of the things, it was always a question of, is that real guilt? So there was always this question in my head of, is this for him, or is this sincere, or is this manipulation, or is this, so I don't know. I mean, I've had the opportunity to heal all of that myself and let all of that go. And that's why I say, strange thing to say, but Alzheimer's, it healed the relationship with my dad. Because I don't have to worry about that anymore. He's not there anymore. He's not that person anymore. He is who he is. And, and I've done so much healing myself that, it doesn't matter. My dad was always he was a great looking guy. He was funny. He was very charismatic, which is how he got away with a lot of the stuff that he got away with. So now I just look at it from that perspective,
No, I have to look at it that way. Like I said, I always wondered, in my own mind, like sometimes we enter these states, right? Alzheimer's, senility, whatever you want to call it, dementia. And I, wondered, does that happen for a reason? Like, you know what I mean? Like, because, some people just go peacefully and, and then you start to wonder, are they reliving their past lives in that situation where they're kind of not really ready to go, right? They're just kind of in this limbo state. Like I've wondered that myself. Like, is that?
Yeah. Oh yeah. In fact, I saw one of my connections on LinkedIn does some work, and I can't remember her name right now. She does some work with Alzheimer's, and there's a center, I think they're somewhere in like St. Louis or something like that. And they did something a couple of weeks ago, and I would have loved to have been able to experience this. Not that I really want to experience it in real life, but to go through this, it was a simulation of what having a brain with Alzheimer's is like. And I was like, that's super scary to me because I've witnessed it now several times with friends and family. And what an impact that might be able to make on the people who are around them. Because one of the things that super frustrates me with the people around people with Alzheimer's is when they argue with them, when they argue with the Alzheimer's patient. And I'm like, why are you arguing with them? All that does is stir them up. You just go along, and in a few minutes, they're going to change. Just redirect them. you know, I mean, they're not doing
Yeah,
something that you want them to do right now. Just redirect them. They'll forget about it.
right.
Why are you arguing with them? You know, so,
That's a
and I
perfect example of meeting them where they are, right? Because it's true. I
exactly,
mean,
exactly.
you meet
And
them
I
in
can't
their world.
imagine living 24/7 with someone like that. I mean, how difficult would that be? I can only imagine. But yeah, like you said, meeting people right where they are.
Mhm. Yeah, we had a friend that unfortunately ended up in a memory facility and who we had known for years. And my mom and I went to visit him. And it took me a few minutes to figure out, what his world was like, right? Because moment he looked like he was with us, and the next minute he was showing us around, acting like he was in Italy, right, from his days of gone.
Yep.
And so I just realized, you know what, you just kind of you step right into it. You know what I mean? You go, oh yeah, yeah. And then
Yep.
I said something, and it's like I said something, and then it triggered him. It's like he came back. You know what I mean? So it was like it was fascinating. I mean, like I said, to really meet him where he was,
Mhm.
and like I said, why argue with it? It's just go with it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I know. So this has been tremendous. So if there's anything else that you would like to convey, that's something that we didn't cover, or something that point of advice that you'd like to give, really anything at this point.
Yeah. One of the things that I would just encourage is to be gentle with yourself as you're going through it, right? Um, and look, I am a type A. I am driven. I am focused. I do not like for things to not be in order. I do not like for things to not be exactly how I want them to be. And I've learned that I get to be gentle with myself. Look, I deal with health stuff now because of the things that I went through in childhood. You know, cortisol burnout, my cortisol is weird. It stays the same all day long. It doesn't do its peak in the morning and go down at night like it's supposed to. And all of that is just because of the things that happened through childhood. So it's not just our relationships that are impacted. And the sooner that we can do the work on forgiving ourselves, the sooner that we can get our system regulated physically, mentally, emotionally, and the bigger impact that we can have for ourselves and the people who are around us, whether that's an intentional impact or unintentional impact. And, just being gentle with yourself through that process. It didn't take you one day to get to here. It's going to take you more than one day to get to there.
Right. And health is, I always say health and safety first. It's most important. You need to get yourself situated and in a good place, right? So you can put your best self forward, right? And do what you need to do. So yeah, it's tremendous.
Yeah.
So Angela Williams Stillwell, thank you so much. And if you want to, share your page, your, outlets, whatever you have, your social media, please do that now. Again, thank you so much for this interview. It's tremendous information. Thank
Yeah. You guys can find me all over the place at Instagram, and I'm on Facebook and LinkedIn and all the places. Most of the places, the handle is AW Stillwell, AWSTILLWELL. So yeah, that's where I am.
Thank you again. All right. You have a wonderful day, a better
Thank
week,
you.
and a wonderful month and year to come. Okay. Years to come.
Absolutely. My
Okay.
pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. Goodbye.